to our next speaker, Powlesland, who is very apt to speak about these issues, and we look forward to hearing what he has to say. Over to you, Paul.
Thanks, Claire. I should say that when Claire first asked me to speak on this panel, I was a little bit unsure about whether I would fit in here or whether I'd be having things to say that fit in with this topic, because Lawyers for Nature is concerned with protecting and representing the natural worlds within the UK, and seeking to try and gain rights for nature within the UK. And obviously these are much more wider global issues, and also concerning migration and how humans interact with the natural world. But then I realized that actually, in many ways, that's one of the key issues that all those seeking to protect nature and to gain rights for nature need to grapple with. And that is ultimately how humans interact with nature, and how everyone's basic, oh, it's just started raining where I am, talking about how humans interact with nature. And how a decent standard of living for all can be maintained within planetary limits, and also while protecting and respecting the natural world. And in inviting me to do this, Claire said, I hope you have some answers for that. And actually, I don't necessarily have that many answers, I'm afraid. These are difficult and complex questions. And one of the things I'm hoping today is that people will bring out questions and also discussion points to begin to move these issues on. Because really, one of the key tasks of this century, and particularly for lawyers, is to work out how we can have a legal framework that allows humans and nature to interact properly and without prioritizing one over the other. And that will contain many difficult, complex and detailed issues that we have barely begun to even work out at the moment. So diving into it a bit, in terms, I presume many people on the call will know about what the idea of rights for nature would entail. But effectively, it means that in the way that human beings, and indeed a number of non-human non-humans have rights in terms of, sorry, let me start that again. Humans and companies and charities have legal personhood, so they can sue and be sued in the court. At the moment, of course, nature can't have that in this country. So trees don't have a right to bring a case to stop themselves being destroyed. Rivers can't appear before the court to allow or to stop themselves being polluted. And to many people who haven't heard about the idea of legal personhood for nature, the idea that trees could appear before a court or rivers could appear before the court can appear slightly ridiculous. But around the world, not in this country yet, but in many different places around the world, nature is receiving rights in a piecemeal fashion, but it is happening. And I sort of want to talk about a couple of those and look at the ways that the different issues can arise. So the most famous one probably is the Wanganui River in New Zealand, which in 2017, through an act of the New Zealand Parliament, received rights and legal personhood and protection. But really, although many rivers around the world have protection, but it was the legal rights that it was granted that's really groundbreaking and impressive. And I think the key thing, I suppose, to note about that is why that happened. We are not likely to be getting a Rights of Rivers Act anytime in the next few years or possibly even decades in the UK. The idea of that would seem crazy. And yet in New Zealand, it's one of the most similar jurisdictions to the UK that exists. And in terms of it follows, or has traditionally followed, UK precedent and the UK system very closely. But they did this groundbreaking act. And the key difference was the existence of the Maori people because for them this river is sacred. It has always been sacred to them. And as part of their settlement negotiations with the British Crown, they demanded that this river be given rights. And so there we see almost straight away one of the key interactions between humans and nature, and why they're not necessarily at odds, because actually it was the people who live on this river who have lived there for 700 years who demanded that the river be given rights. But contrasting that, last year in Bangladesh, the Supreme Court gave their rivers rights, all rivers in Bangladesh rights, and there was immediate concern amongst many people who live amongst the rivers that would then prevent them from doing what they want to do. So it would prevent them building near the rivers, or using or fishing or extracting water and that kind of thing. And so there is this concern that if the rights of nature are imposed in a sort of top-down way, that can then sort of set humans against nature effectively, and it can effectively pit us in war with each other, when actually, of course, that's not the case. The interests of nature and the interests of humans are often aligned, as we see by the fact that the climate and ecological crisis is itself causing humans big problems throughout the world, and indeed that's one of the causes of the migration crisis that we're discussing today. So how then do we avoid this idea of a top-down imposition of nature rights, and also nature's rights being seen as pitted against human rights? And in all honesty, I don't have the answer to that. I think at some point there is going to be conflict, and there is going to be a conflict of rights. The way that I often talk about it with lawyers for nature is when people ask me what should the rights of trees be or the rights of rivers be, it's actually quite hard to sketch them out at the moment in detail, because we're in such a different system that it's hard to envisage in detail what it would look like to have rights for nature where nature has an equal person in standing. But I say that although we don't necessarily know what the rights of nature would be, we do already at this stage know what the wrongs of nature are. So if there's a scale of the rights of nature, at the highest end of protection, we don't know what they're going to be. And at that stage, we will likely be having conflicts between the ways that we want to live now as humans and what the rights of nature would entail, because so many of our actions at the moment are based around extracting nature and using nature. But at the other end, there are things which we could stop right now that actually would not only not make life worse for humans, but would actually arguably make life better. So actually, if we stopped putting sewage into our rivers, for instance, it would make life better for human beings, because then we'd all get to enjoy much more beautiful, cleaner rivers. And similarly, if we don't destroy our most beautiful ancient trees, then people will get to experience those trees and spend time in nature and that kind of thing. So at that point, we can see that we can ban sort of the worst excesses of the destruction of nature now, and actually it would improve human life. But then as we head further down that scale, we start hitting into potential conflicts of rights. And those are the things which I don't necessarily have the answer for now, but which I think we need to start thinking about and sketching out. Because as I said before, the key work of this century for many of us is going to be working out a proper relationship and settlement between humans and nature. And if we don't do that, just solving the climate crisis won't be enough, because even if we got all the carbon out of the atmosphere now, the ecological crises that are taking place around the world would still cause huge destruction of nature, but also of the ways that many human beings want to live, and therefore drive their own migration crisis, whether that's deforestation or over extraction of rivers, etc., etc. And so we need to start grappling with those questions. And again, there's different levels of difficulty in dealing with these. So to bring in a few cases that I've worked on in this country, almost every case I've done that has involved in some ways the destruction of nature, there has been a justification for it, often in terms of humans and what they need or want. So very few people or very few organizations just say, I'm an evil bastard and I want to destroy this river or this tree just because I'm evil. They don't really do that, or greedy. They don't tend to say that. They tend to dress things up. And so in the Sheffield tree case that I was involved in, which many of you may know of, where the council wanted to destroy 17,000 street trees, they justified that not entirely on the basis that they wanted to save money, but on the basis of they needed to make the streets more accessible for disabled people, to be able to go around the streets without having trees in their way and that kind of thing. And in other cases, like with HS2, which is causing huge destruction of ancient woodland in this country now, we see justifications around people wanting economic activity, people wanting to move around, that kind of thing. And similarly, and this perhaps ties into a migration issue as well, how do we deal with the fact of homes and building? Because there's a huge pressure on green space in the UK. And as migration increases, as it will do over the coming century, how do we accommodate all those new people whilst also trying to stop encroachment upon nature? Now, we can obviously pick off some of the easy things at one end of the scale. So obviously, if we did huge economic reforms, so ban second home ownership, ban landlords, increase density in cities, use brownfield, change mortgage finance, we can do a lot. But there will come a point probably where there will be a direct conflict between, okay, we need to build this many homes and we have to do this over nature. How do we do that? And it's a difficult question, and one that I think lawyers who want to protect nature are going to have to grapple with in the coming years. I guess there's one last issue that I kind of wanted to end on, and it links back to what I said about the river in New Zealand and also the river in Bangladesh. And that's that I think it's reasonably clear that the greatest defenders of nature, the natural world, and the environment ecology around the world are Indigenous people. I think we can accept that and see that quite clearly. And so how does that work in a country like England, where we don't effectively have an Indigenous people anymore with a connection to the land because that was destroyed so long ago? And I believe quite strongly that we need to rebuild those links between people and nature and the land if we are ever to have proper protection for nature, because fundamentally real protection for nature will come where people are very much in love with nature and in love with their land, and wish and hold it sacred and wish to protect it. And without that, I always feel it will be an uphill struggle to protect nature, because people will always have a justification, whether it's wanting to make flat level streets or wanting to get to Birmingham 20 minutes quicker, for destroying nature. And ultimately, they will protect that which they hold sacred and love. But that's hard. It feels hard to do in this country, where we lost our connection to the land so long ago. And there's also a risk, and I think this was something the first speaker said today, of, how do we avoid overtones of eco-fascism? So falling in love with nature can very easily move into kind of fascist, kind of eco-fascism, blood and soil kind of rhetoric. And indeed, Indigenous people, the term Indigenous in this country is usually a racist trope around sort of England for English people. So how do we reclaim that idea in a way that doesn't bring in right-wing, toxic, fascist ideals? Because I do believe we need to reclaim it. We need to be careful how we do that as well. And also, how do we reclaim an idea of love for nature and love for this land in an inclusive way? So how do we say that actually there is an important human need to feel connection to and love for the place that you live? I think that's very clear. And I feel that much of that ground much of that idea has been ceded to the right wing, because the left don't really deal with it that much, because I think we find it a little bit weird and perhaps toxic. And so we allow the entire idea of love for this land, to be subsumed within patriotism and the Queen and the army and Churchill and all that rubbish. Not entirely, well, yeah, mostly rubbish. And we don't give a kind of positive version of what an inclusive love for this land and this place would be like. And that's something I think we should explore, and I'd be keen to hear people's ideas on and questions. For me, it's a very basic idea. I think that any citizenship ceremony should, instead of like getting people to sing the national anthem in front of a picture of the Queen, actually go out into this countryside and learn about the trees and the birds that we have here, and get every person as a symbol to plant a new tree, perhaps in this land, to mark the fact that they are now connected to this place, they belong here, and they also need to help protect it as well. So I think, in a slightly roundabout way, that brought me back to the question of migration from some of the work that Lawyers for Nature does. So, and as I say, these are just mostly posing questions that I think we need to deal with, so I'm really keen to hear your thoughts in the Q&A.
Thank you so much, Paul. That's really fascinating, and I mean, these are really complex questions, and something that, you know, is up to all of us to try and tease out together in this cross-disciplinary way, and that this platform allows for.